My name is KIARA. I am 25 years old and I am from Jalisco, Mexico. Until recently, my life seemed to be in a relatively calm place. I had a 2-year relationship with an amazing guy named Marcos. He and I shared laughter, adventures, and special moments that seemed to be taken out of a romantic film. But, as often happens, routine began to take over our relationship. As time went by, I found myself longing for something thrilling, something that would shake my world and make me feel alive again. And, to be honest, I held a secret fantasy tucked deep within my mind. I liked the idea of being seen, of being admired. And, in a strange way, that fantasy centered around my gynecologist. Yes, I know, it sounds a bit odd. But, who can control their darkest thoughts? In my mind, there was something sensual and daring about the idea of being examined so intimately by a man, even if it was just his job. I couldn't help it. My relationship with Marcos was far from bad. He was a caring, hard-working boy, and he was always there for me. However, our love life had fallen into monotony, and my thoughts kept returning to that forbidden fantasy. It was a secret that made me blush every time I went to my gynecologist appointment. So, with this introduction to my life, let's begin to unravel the story of how that fantasy turned into a complicated reality. Next, I'll tell you about my first visit to the gynecologist, Dr. Martinez, and how everything began to change in that seemingly common medical office. As I mentioned before, my relationship with Marcos continued, but I still yearned for that touch of excitement in my life. In addition, I was facing some gynecological health issues that needed attention. So, I finally decided to make an appointment with the gynecologist, Dr. Martinez. The morning of my first appointment was filled with nerves. My mind was filled with dark thoughts and conflicting emotions. I couldn't help but feel peculiar anticipation, something that went beyond worry for my health. I made sure to dress in my best lingerie. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to look my best. When I arrived at Dr. Martinez's office, I was pleasantly surprised to find it a clean and welcoming place. The receptionist was kind, and after a bit of paperwork, she led me to the waiting room. While waiting, my heart was racing. I was about to share my most intimate parts with a stranger. Finally, the moment came. The nurse called me and took me to Dr. Martinez's consultation. The office was well lit and had a warm atmosphere that calmed me. I sat on the stretcher, nervous yet eager to meet the doctor who would trigger a series of events that would change my life. And then, he walked in. Dr. Martinez was a mature man, with a confident presence and a kind smile that lit up the room. He made me feel comfortable right away. As if I was talking to an old friend. During the consultation, Dr. Martinez was professional and attentive. He explained each step of the examination clearly and concisely, which made me feel less nervous. But, as the consultation progressed, something began to change within me. I realized that my secret fantasy was coming to life. His hand, medical and careful, made me feel things I had never experienced during a medical visit before. His closeness, his calming voice, and his intense gaze sparked a desire in me that I couldn't ignore. My mind was in between inappropriate thoughts and duty to maintain composure in that situation. What surprised me the most was that, at a certain moment, I could have sworn I saw a mischievous look in his eyes, as if he was also playing in my secret game. But, was it possible for him too to feel something more than just professionalism? The examination finally ended and I left Dr. Martinez's office with a head full of confusing thoughts. My fantasy was no longer just a dark secret in my mind. It was turning into an awkward and thrilling reality. When I got home after my appointment with Dr. Martinez, my head was filled with turbulent and exciting thoughts. I couldn't stop thinking about how his expert hands had explored my body. How his gaze had caught me in a game of mutual desire. I couldn't help but feel excited and guilty at the same time. The truth is that this consultation with the gynecologist meant more than just a simple medical visit. It was as if a door had been opened to a world of known sensations and hidden desires. I had never felt like this before, and that scared me. My mind wouldn't stop spinning, and my secret fantasy was becoming even more of a reality with each thought. I wondered if Dr. Martinez had also felt that tension in the office, if he too was entangled in this forbidden game. Or perhaps it was just my imagination playing a cruel joke on me. Nights turned into evenings filled with improper thoughts and imprinted desire. I could not help but imagine what the next visit to the gynecologist would be like. Would I feel that desire again in the air? Would I have the courage to take any steps to explore these feelings? My relationship with Marcos became even more complicated. Even though he continued to be the incredible guy he had always been, my constant thoughts about Dr. Martinez made me question everything. Was I satisfied with the comfort of our relationship, or did I want more excitement, more passion? On the other hand, involving myself with Dr. Martinez could potentially put my relationship at risk. As you will recall, I shared how my thoughts after my first visit to the gynecologist, Dr. Martinez, were full of forbidden desires and intense emotions. Now, I will tell you how my obsession for him turned even more intense as the day of my second visit approached. After that first experience with Dr. Martinez, I could not stop thinking about him. His hands, his gaze, his voice, everything about him had left me craving for more. My secret fantasy had turned into an obsession that accompanied me everywhere. The day of my second appointment was coming up, and the anticipation kept me in a constant state of arousal. Every time I thought about the next visit to the gynecologist, my heart would beat faster and my mind would fill with naughty thoughts. I could not help it, even though I knew that what I was feeling was dangerous and out of place. In my head, I had created scenarios where the consultation with Dr. Martinez went far beyond what was medically necessary. I imagined encounters filled with lust, glances full of desire, and intimate moments that went against all professional ethics. But what could I do? I was trapped inside my fantasy, and I did not know how to escape. As the day of my second visit approached, my nights became restless. My dreams were filled with provocative images involving Dr. Martinez. I would wake up sweaty and with a fast-beating heart, feeling an urgency to do something about it. Of course, my relationship with Marcos was suffering the consequences of my obsession. I had become more distant, less interested in our activities together, and he was starting to notice. Arguments became more frequent and my guilt grew with each passing day. I knew what I was doing was unfair to him, but I could not stop thinking about the gynecologist that had entered my life in such an explosive way. As the date of my second visit approached, I could not help but feel that my fate was sealed. I knew that something was going to happen in that appointment, something that would change my life in a way I could not imagine. I was caught in a spiral of forbidden desires and didn't know how to get out. Finally, the day of my second appointment with Dr. Martinez came and I was anxious and nervous. I could think of nothing else as I made my way to his office. My mind was filled with forbidden thoughts and mixed emotions. As I got closer to the office, I felt a knot in my stomach. I knew that I had to control my desires and keep things professional, but my fantasy was in full swing. I decided to take an additional step to make my visit even more provocative. That day I decided to go without underwear, a choice that had dual intent. I wanted to know if Dr. Martinez would notice and how he would react. When I entered the office, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Dr. Martinez greeted me with a professional smile and led me to the examination room. With each step I took, I could feel the fabric of my skirt brushing against my skin, which increased my arousal. Dr. Martinez started the consultation, asking routine questions about my health. His soft voice and concentrated gaze had me hypnotized despite his professional questions. I felt that every word that came out of his mouth had a double meaning, at least in my mind. As the consultation progressed, the time came to perform the physical examination. I laid down on the stretcher, and Dr. Martinez began to examine me. Although his movements were clearly medical and cautious, my state of arousal did not diminish at all. My thoughts clouded with desires and fantasies. I felt that my body was responding to his touch in a way I had never experienced before. My cheeks burned with both embarrassment and desire, an explosive mix that had me trapped in the gynecologist's office. Even though Dr. Martinez continued to be professional, his intense eyes and physical proximity only increased the tension in the air. I wondered if he would notice my lack of underwear, if that would spark some kind of reaction in him. But, at the same time, I was afraid that my secret fantasy would be discovered and the consequences would be unpredictable. What occurred during the second appointment was completely unexpected. As I mentioned, my mind was filled with forbidden thoughts, and my body was in a constant state of arousal. Dr. Martinez continued to be professional and attentive as he conducted the physical examination, but his closeness and the delicacy of his touches had me in a state of hypnosis. I felt trapped in a mix of desire and confusion. And then, in an instant that neither I nor Dr. Martinez had anticipated, my body temperature abruptly increased and I climaxed right there in the medical office. Yes, I had an orgasm. Embarrassment and astonishment mixed in that moment. My cheeks were burning, and my heart was pounding, as I experienced an overwhelming mixture of pleasure and confusion. Dr. Martinez seemed surprised but maintained his professionalism, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. He helped me get dressed quickly and I left the office, feeling as though I had crossed an even more dangerous line in this story. Once at home, I grappled with my desires and emotions. I knew that I had crossed a boundary and that my relationship with Marcos was in danger. My moral dilemma was becoming even more complex, and I felt trapped between two worlds. On one hand, there was my relationship with Marcos, which had been my world for so long, and on the other, my uncontrollable desire for Dr. Martinez, which had turned into an obsession. My thoughts were unbearable and filled with doubts. What did what happened in the office mean? Was it just a physical reaction, or was there more to it? I wondered if Dr. Martinez had noticed what happened if my orgasm had been apparent to him. But, above all, I wondered what to do next. The next day, after hours of tossing and turning, I decided to send a message to Dr. Martinez. I felt that I needed to apologize for what happened in his office, even though deep down I knew that I had enjoyed that unexpected moment. The message said, "Dr. Martinez, I want to apologize for what happened yesterday in your office. It was an embarrassing and inappropriate moment, I don't know what came over me. I hope we can move on as professional and patient." I anxiously awaited his response, not knowing how he would react. To my surprise, his response came faster than I expected. My phone screen lit up with a message that read, "Lord, I understand that it was an unusual moment, but I also noticed that you enjoyed it. If you ever decide to explore that further, I assure you it will be our little and exciting adventure. My home is available to you if you dare." I read those words over and over again, trying to process what was happening. Dr. Martinez was making me an indecent proposal, inviting me to continue what had been started in his office. My mind was filled with mixed emotions, excitement, desire, guilt and fear. On one hand, the idea of continuing with Dr. Martinez was tempting and dangerously exciting. The chemistry between us was evident, and the desire I felt for him consumed me. But, on the other hand, I knew that this meant betraying Marcos, the man who had been at my side for so long. My thoughts were clouded by my fantasy. Should I accept Dr. Martinez's proposal and succumb to temptation? Or, should I resist and fight for my relationship with Marcos? I felt trapped between two worlds, with no clear answer in sight. Here we are, at this part of the story that changed my life forever. After receiving the daring message from Dr. Martinez, I found myself at a crossroads. The temptation to continue what had started in his office was very strong. And while I struggled with guilt, and I knew I was betraying Marcos, desire was stronger. Days passed where my mind was divided. On one hand, I had the life I had shared with Marcos for years, a solid relationship that had withstood many challenges. On the other hand, there was the burning attraction I felt for Dr. Martinez, a forbidden passion that had led me to experience an orgasm in his office. Eventually, after many sleepless nights and internal debates, I made the decision that would irrevocably change my life. I accepted Dr. Martinez's indecent proposal and agreed to visit his house. The day of our appointment arrived. I was in the midst of a dangerous and forbidden adventure as I headed towards his address. I was nervous and excited at the same time, aware that I was crossing a line with no return. Even though I kept telling myself it would be just another encounter, I knew I was lying to myself. Dr. Martinez's house was a beautiful refuge on the outskirts of the city. When I entered, he welcomed me with a smile that made it clear he was eager to continue what we had started in his office. There weren't many words, as the sexual tension between us was palpable. We quickly found ourselves in his bedroom, and Dr. Martinez looked at me with an intensity that made me shiver. I knew there was no turning back. I felt vulnerable and excited at the same time as he began to explore my body with expert hands. Each touch, each kiss fueled the fire that was burning within me. I gave in to desire without reserve, letting pleasure engulf me once more. The passion we shared was intense and overwhelming, and soon we plunged into a world of ecstasy and lust. Hours passed, and finally, exhausted and satisfied, we fell asleep on the bed. As I clung to Dr. Martinez, feelings of guilt and regret flooded over me. I had betrayed Marcos, the person who had loved and supported me for so long. When I finally left his house, I knew I had made a decision that would change my life forever. I had succumbed to temptation and betrayed Marcos's trust. My relationship with him would never be the same again, and the shadow of my infidelity would hover over us forever. This part marks the end of my story. Throughout this narration, I have shared with you my most intimate fantasies and my most controversial actions. Passion and desire can cloud our judgment, but we must also be mindful of the wounds we can inflict on the people we love the most. My betrayal of Marcos has left me with a hole in my heart that will never completely disappear. Infidelity is a complex and painful topic, and I don't intend to justify my actions. I want this story to serve as a warning for those who are tempted by forbidden passion. The consequences of our actions can be deeply painful, and sometimes it's impossible to go back and correct our mistakes. Thank you for being part of this gripping story of infidelity. If you want to continue enjoying and exploring other exciting stories, I invite you to subscribe. Join our community so you don't miss a single video. Click on the subscription button to receive instant updates on our upcoming stories. I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next video. Don't miss it, subscribe now and discover a world of fascinating stories.